Greetings and salutations, fellow questioners. This is a recorded episode with the great, maybe infamous Joshua Cutchin. So unfortunately, you won't be able to ask questions at the end like we normally do. But you know what? I think what we're going to get out of him is going to be great because everything he says is great. Y'all know I've referenced his work, Where the Trackway Ends and Ecology of Souls a lot of time. Footprints. Sorry,
yeah,
Footprints.
That's okay. That's okay. Oh, you're good.
And Ecology of Souls a lot, but you have got a new book out right now, right?
I do. I made the first step into fiction because it was one of those things I wanted to see if I could do it, and I wanted to sort of entertain this quasi supernatural quality that I've heard a lot of fiction writers talk about, where your characters talk to you and inform you what they are and are not going to do. And
yes,
I got that. You know, so for the longest time I was a good little Jungian, and I used to say things like, people don't have ideas have people, but I'd never really experienced that until this, and it was eye-opening, to say the least.
Yeah, that's a fun one. Yeah. Where you start writing and you're like, wait a minute, hold on, this character wouldn't do that. And that's usually when you can tell a good writer from a bad writer, is that the bad writers just violate the character's volition all the time.
Yeah.
And you read it and you're like, that doesn't feel real. And you can almost hear even in, like, you're reading the book and you can almost feel the character wrestling with the author itself. It is a weird phenomena.
Yeah, it's kind of, so a plug. It's called Them Old Ways Never Died. It's my Appalachian addiction goblin trauma drama. And those are all the keywords you can fit in. But it was really interesting because at one point I had to, this might actually have some bearing on what we plan to discuss tonight. At one point I had to do a pretty substantial rewrite of one of the chapters, and there was the sense as I was rewriting it that I wasn't coming up with something different that fit better or anything. It was just this sense of, oh, I got the transmission wrong. Like I transcribed this wrong, and it was always meant to be this way instead of the way that I had it, where a character was delivering a lot of exposition. So it really is, it verges on something numinous. It really does. I mean, I read an interview with Ray Bradbury where he would say that in the wee hours of the morning, he would just sort of get out of bed and go down to his library and pick out one of his old books and thumb to a passage and just sit there and weep because he had no idea where this came from. So yeah, it's an uncanny thing to experience, and I feel very fortunate that I got to.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I've already ordered it. I'm really looking forward to that one. And again, it's called Them Old Ways. And I'll put a link in the doobly-doo below. I'm guessing you can find it anywhere. Amazon.
Yeah, pretty much just Amazon, because I ended up,
gotcha. Yeah.
I ended up, the self-publishing back end of Amazon is so robust and user-friendly that I just went with it, and I've had some good experiences with it in the past. So, there is that. As much as all of our misgivings that we do have about Amazon, I share them, and I'm a fan of brick and mortar stores. To that end, I've played Johnny Bookseed and put some in some brick and mortar stores myself on consignment. But you can get it also directly from me if people just write me a signed copy, no upcharge or anything. Yeah.
All right. Well, then, yeah, we'll do that link in the doobly-doo below.
Okay.
So the reason I reached out to you is it was well, first of all, I just love your work, but you'd made a comment about the power of words on Facebook. And one of the things I've been wrestling with, because little behind the scenes, I'm a huge believer in the Whorf-Sapir hypothesis. For those who don't know, essentially, the basic idea is, if you don't have a word for a concept, you don't understand that concept, right? That's sort of a very very dumbed down version of it. It's a lot more complicated than that, but that's essentially the gist. Is that if you don't have a word explaining deep time, you have no real concept of deep time. That's sort of an idea. Have you ever, I know we've all sort of had that experience where you feel something, you find out there's a word for it, and you're like, that's what I'm feeling, and like it makes sense to you.
Schadenfreude was probably the first time that that I encountered that.
Yeah. Great word, by the way. The Germans have great words,
They
and
do.
a lot of words are just completely ridiculous. But that's another podcast entirely. So I'm a big believer in that, and I do think that what we even say aloud to ourselves about ourselves, we program our own brains sometimes. And I'm wary of a lot of songs. Like there was a song where the refrain, it was one of those pop songs, is "I wish I could be like the cool kids," and it was over and over and over. And I'm like, that's trying to, like, you're programming your brain. If you're
It's
hearing it, you're singing it, your
it's kind of
brain's programming
entrainment,
itself.
right? It's kind of an
Yes,
entrainment idea. Yeah. Yeah.
but beyond that is something I'm really sort of dealing with right now, and that's why I wanted to have you on, which is is that, do our words carry power outside of ourselves? Not just, are we changing the way we're viewing things? Are we changing our inner thoughts? Does our language change the outside world as well? And that's sort of the idea I wanted to bring you on and hear your thoughts on.
Well, I have heard certain things about that in the past, that certain cultures might not have the shared language of another culture that they make
Mm-hmm.
contact with, and so they introduce a term, and the question becomes, did they perceive, I don't know, the sky as blue, as our blue, before they got the word blue. And I don't really know what to think about that. It kind of sounds like a very Terrence McKennaism, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I do wonder sometimes if we don't tend to sort of, it's kind of trite to talk about at this point, but we don't sort of co-create our reality in that sense.
Yeah.
Um, because everything is a placeholder. My favorite,
Mm-hmm.
one of my favorite memes is this tide washing up on shore and this guy nailing
Mm-hmm.
into the tide, and it says, the tide is labeled with reality, and each individual nail is labeled language. And I really do feel like it is that way.
Yes.
And the thing that terrifies me to a degree is that, like, it just keeps us, not only does it sort of, a good way for me to sort of conceptualize how language makes reality is to think of
Mm-hmm.
medical diagnosis. I
Oh
was
yeah.
in a band, and I was subbing for a bass player who had a spinal injury of some sort,
Mm.
and the doctors didn't know what it was. They just had it was undiagnosable, and that sort of set me in that moment. I believe he's doing better now, so thank heavens. But that in that moment really sort of set me down this path of thinking about the fact of how it feels, as terrifying as certain diagnoses are. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
comforting in a way to have a name that you can put on it, and there's a name, and there's a drug that also
Yeah.
has a name, and the drug will fix the problem, because this very causal sort of relationship that we like to perceive. But
Yeah.
you know um you know cancer doesn't call itself cancer. um it tends to behave a certain way, but there are always these outliers
Mm-hmm.
that behave in different ways.
Yep.
And you hear these, if you're ever a child interested in
Mm-hmm.
Fortiana, you run across these stories of the kid who couldn't stop sneezing for 3 years or something like that. And it's just
Yes.
these little
Yeah.
blips that just come in
Weird.
and out, and there's no name for it, and it's just, that to me is like a Lovecraftian diagnosis. Like, we have no name for this thing that you're experiencing. um and so it does sort of bring into question things like the placebo effect. I mean, words are
Mm-hmm.
kind of placebos in a way. um
Yeah.
you know uh that's, we were talking about the novel. Like, I have no idea how to classify its genre, because it sort of blends a bunch of different things. And you know I I think it's obviously good for us. You can't stop human beings from learning how to speak. I presume that one day, thousands of years in the future, our affinity for writing, well, it might have changed since the advent of all this screens and keyboards that we're dealing with. But
Yeah.
I presume that one day, thousands of years in the future, you wouldn't be able to keep us from, if we hadn't been introduced to all that, you wouldn't be able to keep us from writing either. But
Yeah.
so we're hardwired to adopt language, and so obviously it serves an evolutionary purpose, I think, in that sense, if you want to take the materialist route.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also a handicap. I'm sort of rambling and spitballing here, but
no. You're building a foundation, is what you're doing.
Yeah,
that's what I see.
And so, I think that if you want to sort of introduce AI into the conversation,
sure, why not?
It's kind of funny. I was speaking with when I was working on the book, the novel. I was speaking with another novelist friend of mine about how he felt that things like Chat GPT would impact the author business, and he summed it up very nicely. And he said that there's still an AI uncanny valley, a textual uncanny valley to some of the writing. I'm like, oh, that's what I've been trying to describe. It's just this very formal and stilted sort of way. And, in my more hopeful moments, I suspect that you'll never be able to remove that sort of human element. The way that words are played with. I'm sure supposedly if we keep on this path, there'll be that sort of level of sophistication, but for the foreseeable future, I don't see it really stepping in that sense.
I would definitely agree with you on that. There's the human element that you just can't really get rid of. Even the AI art, like you can tell when it's AI 9 times out of 10, right? I mean, particularly if it's just a random prompt. You can see AI working with, like, if a human has had a hand in it, it looks cleaner, it looks more cohesive. But there's a lot of things that I think AI can be good at, but there's others where it's like you said, you feel that stiltedness.
Well, it's like in AI's strive towards perfection, it introduces imperfection. It's some of the best moments of art are things that are not best practices.
Correct.
I'm thinking 100%. Of the things that you learn in composition school or the things that you learn in art class. It's like, don't do this, don't do that. But then, to push beyond that, I think is where the human really lies.
Well, and I've been looking at a lot of Jack Kirby art lately. Just love his stuff. And I was watching a quick thing that someone was talking about, because they said he's the artist's artist. And I thought about it. I'm like, you know what? I get what he means. Like, there's the comedian's comedian who he's the comedian that makes the comedians laugh, but not necessarily the audience. For
sometimes,
a lot of people,
I feel that way about the UFO stuff. Like, I feel like the people who read the UFO stuff don't know me as well as some of the researchers do. So
yeah. Well, and I think that's, it's a high praise. I mean, but I think that's true. And like Kirby's is an artist where a lot of people, it's not, don't get me wrong, he was loved by the community, obviously, and by the fans, but a lot of artists a lot of people had trouble with him because he broke so many rules. Like, he just did. And when you see, but then the artists who are like, no, you need someone to break that rule, you appreciate him even more.
Yeah.
Because he was breaking those rules. Now, the question then becomes, if words have power, not just to program ourselves, but, and again, the way obviously we perceive reality is a big thing. Maybe it even has the ability to I don't think if we all said, okay, the sky is orange, that it would turn a different color, right? I don't think necessarily that. I'm not thinking about that, but do our words have the ability to sort of shape reality in a way? But does that mean giving AI the power of language that we have? Are we sort of giving it almost something are we giving it maybe more power than we realize by doing that?
I think that the answer is yes, whether you approach it from a physicalist perspective or from a metaphysical perspective. I think that the answer both ways is yes. I one of my favorite quotes that I've ever read was that one day historians will look at social media the same way we look at Romans and lead. And so obviously, like the way that we interact with the written word and the spoken word, but also just the world that words shape. I think as much as we have an affinity to it, we're especially susceptible to it. So that's sort of like the physicalist idea. But if we look at it from a metaphysical standpoint, I mean, that's sort of one of the foundations of magical practice, right? I mean, the idea
Right.
of the power of words, and you can even look back in a lot of these religious texts talking, the word
Mhm.
was God, there's I believe it was Thoth who spoke himself into being, and the word made flesh in Christ is sort of a similar theme. So um, it also might speak to the sort of hyperstitious way that narratives can take on a life of their own.
Yeah.
I don't know how much stock you put into those tulpa or egregore ideas. Alan Moore running into John Constantine
I
and
have
things
talked
like,
about that.
yeah.
Yes.
But it feels kind of truthy,
Yeah.
to use a Colbertism. It really
Actually, I
does.
think there was an Oprahism first.
Oh, okay, fair enough, fair
Yeah.
enough. But and I think that this is something that the flying saucer crowd is always missing.
Yeah.
This sort of the false dichotomy that we have between fiction and fact. I don't think that line is as well defined. I think it's as porous as the
Mhm.
line between physical and non-physical as well. In fact, it's kind of the
Yeah.
embodiment of physical and non-physical in a way.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean,
Well,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
so to that no, to that point, actually, this is one of those things that I wouldn't have thought to bring it into this conversation, but something you said just clicked there, right? How often are there books that are written or that are fiction, movies that are made, and then within 10, 20 years, I'm not talking like science fiction, oh, they're talking about a phone. I mean, like the Titanic, right? There
Yeah.
was the sinking of the Titan. Um, Armageddon, the movie, the movie with they where they go off and blow up an asteroid, right?
Mhm.
The opening scene, it has these asteroids or these meteorites. Technically, even once they've entered the atmosphere, they're a meteorite, slamming themselves into New York City. The last parting shot of that scene has smoke billowing out of one of the twin towers
Mhm.
exactly where it was hit, right?
And then the lone gunman and the
Yeah.
Simpsons and all the stuff that prefigured 9/11. Yeah, it's kind of
Mhm,
so. I mean, there are a couple of ways to approach this, right? You've got the retro
mhm,
causality crowd, which I'm sympathetic to, but it always
mhm,
kind of makes my brain hurt. And then you've got like the
mhm,
conspiracists and the synchro mystics who kind of I've stood by this for a while, and I'll stand by it now. Like
mhm.
I don't think they realize how much they're disenchanting the world in that sense. Like
Yeah.
I find that my world is much more magical in the sense that these archetypes just sort of resonate through time without
Mhm.
being part of some overarching plan. But then there's that idea too that we're like, sort of actually creating our own realities in that sense.
Yeah.
It's something that doesn't really get entertained as much. But yeah, I think I don't think we understand it. I think that there's a connection there, that
Yeah.
people like to poo-poo this as just a coincidence, but I think that there's something I think there's some meat on those bones in terms of there being some sort of link. Um, but at the
Mhm.
same time, I don't think that I don't resonate as strongly with egregores and tulpas as I once did. I just
Yeah.
because I feel like if that's the case, we should see, Darth Vader walking outside on the streets all the time.
That's
Um,
what okay, so no, so that's a really great point. Okay, and it just occurs to me, and I sort of assume people know what a tulpa or egregore is. And again, Donnie and I, we've had this conversation. The Don't worry, the audience knows who Donnie is. About how even the word tulpa has been it's mangled it is a mangled idea from what it originally is in
right.
Zen Buddhism. But essentially, it's the idea of a thought form that people thinking about a thing causes a thing to come into existence, and it has its own life. That's a very, again, dumbed down version of this idea that we're playing with in the modern world. Again, it's very separate from what a true tulpa is, but I'm kind of right there with you on the whole. I don't think that doesn't match because we should be seeing again. We see a John Constantine. It's actually Constantine from the comics. Um, I'm gonna be that guy
You're
for
that
this.
guy. Yeah, yeah.
I'm this guy. Well, as a comic fan, they actually after the movie came out, he's like they made that a point where he would say it's John Constantine. It's they draw like they would really spell that out.
Okay, fair enough.
But it's like, why Constantine and not Superman, right? Why or why, again, to your point, why not a Darth Vader? Plenty of people have been looking at him, thinking about him, writing about him, but it's Constantine. Now, again, the guy who creates him believes in was a practicing Matt. So there's maybe something there because other people have had that encounter. But to your point, if a tulpa was only that, then we should have a lot more running. Where's Godzilla? Right?
yeah, seriously. I mean, it's so I'm a little bit more sympathetic to like this sort of idea of hyperstition and this idea that, I mean, you could probably even bring into the conversation some of the Mandela effect stuff too. I mean, I can't say for certain that that I, as a child, saw a girl with braces smile at Jaws in Moonraker.
Yeah.
But so is that me misremembering, or is that enough people started to think that way, or which way does this flow? I really don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think once you start playing around with language or letting something that isn't human play around with language, I do think it gets dodgy real quick. Especially when you're dealing with a medium as ephemeral as the internet. Where for all we know, the AI could be a lot smarter than we think it is, and it's just rewriting websites and histories as we speak. But again, that's sort of the
terrifying thought. Fear.
Yeah, that's sort of the mundane fear. But at that point, if a couple generations pass and it had and we keep on relying even more and more on digital media, then who knows? Like a couple generations from now might have lost all grasp on what actually happened.
It's Orwell without the humans.
It is. It is.
That has just become my new fear. Thank you for that.
Well, I think there's a saving grace to this. So, my good friend Red Pill Junkie, Miguel Romero, did he wrote an article on the UFO disclosure, and he mentioned how a lot of the stuff that we are hearing now is he put forth the idea that a lot of stuff we're hearing now is confirming some of the stories we've been hearing for a couple of years, because it's just this sort of Ouroboros of self-confirmation.
Yeah.
And he likened that to a trend that some AI engineers have discussed of model collapse, where you have so much AI content being generated that the AI generators start drawing upon that for inspiration, and it becomes this loop.
Yeah.
So I think that might sort of confound this a little bit. I hope that it will confound this a little bit. That's sort of what I'm personally relying on or hoping for, is that it just sort of ends up spinning its wheels and can't really gain any traction. But I don't know. It's sort of a terrifying space to be in, geopolitically, and stuff here at home, and add the AI on top of it as the cherry on top.
Well, I think there's a weird combination here where, particularly with AI, I am one of those people who wonders how sophisticated does something need to be affected by the things on the outside, right? Going back to the idea of I don't believe in a tulpa per se. However, I do ask this question: why is it we know for a fact that Slender Man is fake lore? We know exactly who created him and when, and yet people say they've seen him. Now, my question becomes: is it just that Slender Man fits sort of this weird, like he's nondescript enough that that he maybe just matches some stuff that's already out there, or again, are tulpas simply a way for things to what we call tulpas are actually things entering into our reality through that sort of open door? Like, it gives it a creature perhaps that can again a way for a demonic entity, some sort of spiritual entity, however you want to label it, a chance in. I don't know, right? But then to take that one step further, if these entities have the ability to manipulate, these things on the outside, if they can manipulate AI and technology to a point, could they create some sort of again, almost like a digital doorway for them to enter our reality almost unrestricted?
I mean, I think that's possible because it sort of loops back on quite parsimoniously with what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation about ideas having people. Like all these, if you adopt that approach, like everything that can be thunk is already out there, which I think is, for me, is a much more enticing variation on the idea of multiverses, right? It's just the idea that anything that could happen is out there, and it's just a matter of being channeled, for lack of a better term. And we have seen, if we're adopting the position that there is sort of a spirit world, for lack of a better term, or another world, we have seen a certain affinity for electronic manipulation. I mean, it seems to be the one thing that they can most easily manipulate, from electronic voice communication to stopping car engines. And it's not just UFOs; it's cryptids and ghosts too. And turning off lights and all that stuff. Yeah. So
jacking up your cameras. Yeah. I mean, it's anyone who's spent any time in the field has had problems with their game cams that you don't have around normal animals. Like you just do. Right. I mean, it is a level of control that is disturbing if you think about it for a little bit longer, because then you realize, well, isn't our brain largely running on electrical impulses?
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. I was just having this conversation last night with somebody. Is sort of an idea with so many references to the soul as being an orb of light. I mean, it's a universal trope. You find it in all of the inhabited continents, right? And then this sort of speculation that, I mean, at first glance, that's definitely energy. It might be, as some people suggest, some sort of living plasma. But what if what we've been playing around with since that apocryphal lightning strike to the kite with the key? What if we've been playing around with all this time is literally like soul? What if it's soul energy? And if you adopt that sort of perspective, then a lot of what the ritual magicians claim starts to make more sense. That things like the very act of picking up a pencil is a magical act because you are changing reality to your will. Well, you're kind of imparting for a brief moment soul energy to the pencil, because your electrical impulses are going that way. So, I mean, it's kind of a frightening concept, and I'm sure a lot of people will think that it's sort of superstitious in a sense, but I think it's something to consider. The other thing that I think we need to be wary of is the fact, or the possibility, that I think you and I would both agree that the brain does not generate the consciousness. It's not generating what we would call mind. So what are the parameters for generating consciousness? I have wondered in the past if it's just a sufficiently complex system, and then consciousness sort of flows into that system once it reaches that level of complexity. And it kind of sounds like a little bit of what we're flirting with here. Because I definitely fall down on the side of like, these things are not living, these things are not alive. But that possibility makes me sort of reconsider that stance, that we might be, like Dr. Frankensteining this thing. Yeah. It really does.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like we may just be creating a digital petri dish for a consciousness to enter into our reality in a way that it's not supposed to, right?
And we're not like, it's kind of interesting because AI in some sense has existed for quite a long time, but we've always been giving it things like, menial tasks and data entry and computation and stuff like that. But now we've handed them, as our conversation is talking about, our most profound innovation as a species. This idea to, in Terence McKenna's words, make small mouth noises that transfer your thoughts in your head to my head, which is really what it is. I mean, it really is. It's analog telepathy. It really is analog telepathy.
I'm sorry, it's the impression that really got me on that.
It's okay.
I
It's
was
fine.
fully prepared for what you were going to say, and you're right. It's analog telepathy. I like that, but it was the impression that got me.
Well,
I was not expecting that.
I throw that in there every now and then. But yeah, it
Mhm.
and as we've seen, words can be incredibly toxic, and they can poison, they can drive people
Mhm.
mad,
Yep.
they can ruin people's lives, they can ruin your own life.
Oh,
um
yeah. Oh,
it is
absolutely.
it is the most, like, after fire, maybe. It
Yeah.
might even be above fire, but after fire, it's our most profound invention if it doesn't have some sort of divine source. um and we've just, like, handed this thing the keys to the kingdom in that sense. um
Yeah. Oh, and
which Yeah.
scripture says that the tongue is the first thing to be burned in hell because of its power. So, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, it's like, maybe this is a bad idea. This whole let's let's give this power to this thing that we don't understand truly. Now, a lot of people are like, oh no, the programmers understand. Uh, if you have been reading the literature, I assure you, they do not.
Well,
One of my favorite stories about that is this was years ago. This wasn't even recent. This was years ago. They did an experiment. They had these little like Roomba looking robots, right, with like a grasper claw. And they had like a hockey puck in the middle of this room, and they're all essentially the same. And they set them out at different distances. They just wanted to run the experiment and said, "Okay, go get the puck." Like that's it. So of course what they're expecting is first one gets the puck, latches it on, and they just all kind of conglomerate and spin around. That's not what happens. They start fighting over the puck. And some of them they started noticing some would wait for the puck to get knocked out, and then they'd go and get the puck. Like they were developing strategies. Just a few years ago, Facebook shut down an experiment because they were trying to find a more effective way of
yeah,
translating. Yeah, and,
they're
and so
chatting with each other. Yeah.
in a language we didn't. They created their own language. It's like, well,
Yeah.
if I need to understand, it's like it'd be easier for me to translate
Mhm.
from German to French or to Congolese or whatever if I actually knew what was going on. So I'm going to create my own language. I can translate it from that language into my language so I can understand what's being said and
Mm.
translate into that language. And they started talking. They're like, nope, shut that down right now.
It's
It's like, we
just
don't understand these things at
no,
all, people. This
no.
is this is this is worse than the whole. Are you sure the atom bomb isn't going to ignite the atmosphere and kill everyone? Yeah, I'm reasonably sure.
Yeah,
Like this
yeah.
is way worse than that.
Yeah, because I mean, the result of the atom bomb explosion is a binary outcome, right? Either it does or it
Mhm.
doesn't. I mean, of
Yep.
course, there are knock-on environmental effects and all that, but in terms of that most pressing question about igniting the atmosphere, it either does or it doesn't, and you're going to know pretty quickly.
Yeah.
This just stretches out into the future ad infinitum. It's kind of interesting. I am of the stance that the UFO phenomenon has continued to reinvent itself over the years, and I believe that's
Yes.
something that you're sympathetic to as well. You know,
More than that. Yes.
spirits, ghosts, demons, fairies, whatever's behind the UFO stuff. And there was an idea put forth that I think I first heard from Martin Kottmeyer, who is I know Dean's talked about him a bit.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
Really one of the unsung thinkers of ufology, just a
He is.
brilliant mind
Mhm.
when it comes to this stuff. And I believe it was he who first put forth this idea um, that perhaps the next iteration of whatever this this thing is. It's the next mask that it chooses is going to be the AI mask, and so that
Mhm.
opens up the question of whether, well, maybe it's just the same influence, just using that as a vector. And
Mhm.
so these ideas of people from other planets coming down in spaceships and taking people becomes, the AI robots from their secret base, probably underground. That's where it's going to go.
Yeah.
Coming up and taking humans in this sort of Matrix-like scenario. And I think that's a really interesting, horrifying, but interesting idea to ponder and consider, because it feels like we're
Yep.
we're way overdue for a new a new skin for
Yeah.
this
A
thing, for
new
this
update.
whatever it is. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. The new patch. Well,
Mhm.
not that any of my shows have ever stayed on track, but that's actually one of the things we talked about on Mysterious Library is look at how often things are in the earth, right? Deep. You have the aliens are in these deep underground military bases, right? Well, where's Fairyland? It's in the earth. Where does the Bigfoot? Again, I still think there is at least a small population of Bigfoot. I think there's evidence for that, but then the vast majority of it is not, right? It is
I'm
something else.
sympathetic to that. Yeah.
But again, I'm just for just putting
and
everything on the table here.
And then where do we put our dead?
Yeah, exactly.
Everything goes
Underground. Exactly. Yeah. But it's like we're often people be like, oh no, the Sasquatch come from in these things under the ground.
Yeah.
Where do we find all these giant skeletons that we can't find again in these chambers we can't find again? They're in caves in the earth, right? Where were the Darrow and the Tarot? They're in these caves deep within the earth. Like it's all the same overlap. It's just the dressing that seems to keep changing. Like as is my UFO friends, it's like, okay, if we have an abduction experience and it's a little gray alien, you're cool with it. But when we have an identical experience, but the creature is a giant birdman that was dancing with other giant birds on a water tower in Texas, or it looks like a troll, or it looks like an actual demon that walked through a wall, suddenly that's off border.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's been my contention for the longest time. Again, not to get off track on our off track here, but I someone shares with me their contact experience and it's sort of by the book. I say, okay, that's it's sort of interesting, and I'll put that in my interesting if true basket, which is huge. My true and false baskets are very small these days, but my interesting if true basket is big in my head. But if they say something like, and the alien was wearing a shirt that said "I heart New York," it's like, okay, well now I actually believe you more because it's so
exactly
so absurd. You never add that in.
Yeah. And there's this weird little element. You're like, okay, hold on. Now you have my attention, because why would you lie about that?
Yeah. And that's sort of been my contention with Whitley Strieber, is that he is good at writing fiction, and like no one who writes fiction and wants to have a coherent plot would string together something like Communion. That's just my 2 cents. Because there are a lot of dead ends and blind alleys in terms
exactly.
of
well, he even says, he's like, whatever in his book, he basically just says, look, whatever I'm looking at isn't what it is. Right. Remind me to talk to you after the show.
Okay.
So I have something about Whitley Strieber I can't put on there.
Okay. But yeah, this sort of underground obsession, I would suspect, in my academic fart sniffy sort of way, that it's probably has some sort of subconscious lunar shadow motif is what's going on. And the suggestion that as much as we like to exteriorize these things, they probably are coming just as much from us as from out there, or wherever out there is. And to a certain degree, the AI kind of embodies that as well. Like, it's not like a thing that you can really get your hands around. It's software, and it's like hiding in your computer, and it's it's something that sort of is slippery and cloistered itself.
So, trying to wrap this all together. Now, again, there's things we just can't put back on the track, right? That toothpaste is out of but that's the best kind of show. But if words have power, not just to sort of program the way we think about the world, because I do believe in sort of like the power of positive thinking, meaning you program your brain to see opportunity or see failure, right? That's like, I believe that's the thing. And Worf's the fear hypothesis. But if words have power beyond that, and I think there's at least evidence to suggest that is the case, then I think what you're saying is maybe giving this power to something we don't fully understand may be a very bad idea in the long run.
Yeah, and you think about like all the texts that it's drawing from. I mean, it's not just drawing from textbooks and innocuous things like that. It's also drawing on the writings and the decrees of tyrants and mass murderers and serial killers and everything else.
Yeah,
so it's
lunatics, occultists, and lawyers.
Yeah. We also not only gave this thing sort of the keys to the kingdom, as I used that phrase before, but we also have shown it all of our dirty laundry too. And the way that words can be used to achieve those ends. And again, I keep on retreating. I'm noticing when I'm discussing this, I keep on retreating back to sort of a more grounded version of what it could do. And maybe that's just because the possibilities of language actually being a tool to shape our reality in the hands of this thing are just too existentially terrifying for me.
It's like I don't even want to think about
that. Yeah.
Like, in a way, it's like the idea that maybe you could have like demon-powered robot or guided robots is far less terrifying than the idea that this thing could somehow maybe reshape reality in some way that we would have no power over. That we may have just abdicated our role to something that isn't accountable to a god. To the and I mean that be like, what did he say? A god? I believe in Jehovah, but my point is, it isn't accountable to any higher moral system. It isn't. It's just like, well, I will do whatever I darn well want. It's literally chaos, and we've just given it the power to maybe change things that we don't even understand, or allow access to things we don't even understand. Like, okay, my Roomba has now we gave it AI and now it's possessed by a demon. Great. I know how to break that.
Yeah.
But what is an internet full of trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of gigabytes of power, of processing power? What could that do? And I think you're right. That's almost far. The idea that it could be doing something on a more materialist plane is almost the terrors of that are far more comforting than the possibility of a more metaphysical danger that it represents.
And it's so much more, the danger is so much more profound because it's a complete blind spot for the people who are sort of behind this. I mean, a lot of discussion is made about how, these quote unquote brilliant people who tend to move progress forward are oftentimes in contact with higher intelligences, thinking specifically of like Carrie Mullis and stuff like that. But at the same time, like I get the sense that a lot of the folks who worked on AI, the Venn diagram between them and people who believe in, I don't even want to say spiritual forces, but let's just use that as a placeholder. I think that Venn diagram doesn't touch at all. Like they're just this complete blind spot for them. That, that language is a tool to shape reality. It's a complete blind spot for them that this could be leaving the door open for something much more profoundly intelligent and evil, perhaps. Or even just indifferent. Indifference is as bad as evil in a lot of ways. It's a blind spot for them. They're sort of wargaming the AI taking over and using humans as batteries, but they're not looking at this other stuff, which is an unprotected flank of humanity. Yeah.
Okay, so then we're going to end with these words of wisdom for the audience. If you know a programmer, go get them to buy Ecology of Souls and make them read it so they know what they're messing with, and maybe they'll not destroy all of reality as we know it by
maybe have them pick up Demonic Reality. Man, that might be useful too.
All right, that one too. You know, get both. It's not either one.
Yeah. But
Joshua, I appreciate you coming on. I really do.
It was an absolute pleasure. I feel like we could just keep on talking about this, but you're being considerate with my time, so I appreciate that. But it was an absolute blast. I really appreciate it.
And again, I'm gonna have the links to the in the doobly-doo below for them old ways.
All right.
Is that all right?
So them old ways never died. Yep.
Them old ways never died. Great. Yep. Again, I'm looking forward to it now that I know I can get a signed copy. I think I will be doing that. So again, Josh, we're going to have you back, when you're, as time permits. And again, appreciate all the work that you're doing.
I'd be so happy to come back, and thanks for the kind words. It's a great hangout.
Thank you, sir. Guys, we'll see you.